Action.
Should we start?
Yes, we should.
Good evening, everybody. Jay and I are back with an overview of the recent ongoing policy affairs from around the world and India, and we are here to give you our 2 cents and our analysis if you care about it enough. But
You do. I know you do. I know you do.
We hope you do.
Yeah.
But recently, and I mean very recently, last couple of days, what's been ongoing in the policy circles and news channels around the world is the appointments made by the nominations of people to the appointments made by Donald Trump, where there have included big names like Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy for the Department of Government Efficiency, or known as Doge, if you may, which is fairly ironic.
Whenever you're going to
but-
say Doge, I'm just going to put that dog in between.
yeah,
us.
and it's a reference, I believe, to
The Dogecoin.
Dogecoin, which gives us a new era of formation of government organizations, which includes some level of trolling also, but it's some subtle kind of trolling. But having said that, the message behind the inclusion of Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk in the Department of Government Efficiency is a message that I sort of subscribe to. Even in the Indian context, we many times we think of cutting red tape and reducing regulatory oversight. So even in the US government and institutions of the federal government in the United States, I believe they have certain norms and rules and regulations which are very red tapey, and as a result of which there's a lot of bureaucracy involved, which is, I think, a very central theme to the Trump campaign, that he's going to have like a populist led government and cut bureaucracy, cut red tape, and sort of push back on the political elitism and hand the power to these young entrepreneurs. Elon Musk is obviously a very successful entrepreneur, but even Ramaswamy is an entrepreneur in himself. So these are younger guys. In fact, if you do an overall analysis of the Trump cabinet, where it's speculative now, I don't know if it's been confirmed yet, but Marco Rubio is going to be his Secretary of State. Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are both sort of young guys.
Elon Musk.
Yeah, Elon Musk is also in his early 50s.
Okay.
Vivek Ramaswamy is like 38.
38.
His Secretary of Defense is this gentleman who's a ex-military person himself. Pete Hegseth is his name. He was a Fox News anchor also. So he's a young guy,
Sorry.
and he goes around wearing a sticker on his shirt that says "Big Government Sucks." So
Okay.
there's a lot of anti-red tape, anti-government interference on the part of this Trump cabinet, and it's showing in his appointments. I'll just finish up after that. Interestingly, because very recently, I think the last year or two, Roe v. Wade as the judgment on abortion has been a very contentious political debate in the United States. And I think what Donald Trump did very smartly was, despite the fact that Roe v. Wade was overturned by judges who were appointed to the Supreme Court by Donald Trump, after this campaign's announcement, Donald Trump stopped making like public comments about abortion that much. He chose to be neutral on the stand, and he sort of left abortion to the states, and that honestly attracted a lot of libertarian votes to him, who otherwise kind of voted Republicans but didn't look eye to eye with the Republicans, maybe on the abortion issue, because they don't really feel like the government should have the right to make decisions about your body. So there's a very anti-bureaucracy, anti-red tape, slashing red tape kind of approach to this whole Trump cabinet, in my view. That is my overall assessment of this, Jay.
Yeah, I agree. This was a very interesting result for American democracy, because I wasn't expecting Trump to, win with such a majority. I had a hint that he might just win, but भाई ऐसे कच्चा छिट्टा फाड़ना तो भाई I did not expect at all.
No,
भाई
absolutely.
it's like कि 6 बॉल पे 6 छक्के मारे उसने, it's like he played all of his cards right. He knew what the voter base he was appeasing.
Yeah.
There was no confusion in his campaign, and to be fair to Mehdi Hassan, who I disagree with on a lot of issues, but this time I really agree with Mehdi Hassan on this one particular point. Mehdi Hassan is a very important journalist. He's a UK-based Indian origin journalist who's now is based out of the
He's
United
Indian
States.
origin?
Yeah, he's Indian origin
I
from
thought he-
Hyderabad.
I thought he had to be Pakistani
everyone
origin.
thought he's Pakistani, but he's Indian origin. He's from Hyderabad. Anyway, so Mehdi Hassan said that this has been the most racist campaign of Donald Trump ever, and I kind of agree with that, because if you remember the debate that was happening between Kamala and Donald Trump, usme he literally said that Chinese immigrants are eating people's dogs. So, I mean, how can you elect someone like that to your president's office? It's bizarre, in my opinion.
I think it's beyond what I can assume. I don't
course.
particularly think that this Trump campaign was any more racist or any less racist than the last one. And for one, I think that Donald Trump has been very outspoken in his
Fair
campaigns.
enough. I mean, hear me out.
And you don't do business in the tri-state area and in New York, which is a very urban, multicultural city, your whole life. If you're like racist at your core.
I agree.
So I think it's a political ploy, maybe a little bit.
But I agree, but like, you have to understand the kind of people he has given platform. The Fox News host, I forgot his name.
Pete Higgs said.
No, not Pete Higgs. The other Fox News host, who was also very important in Trump's campaign. He had his own show. He basically put out one episode on Fox News where he said something to the extent of, British colonialism was so good for India.
Tucker
Carlson. Yeah, that
Tucker
guy.
Carlson.
He said British colonialism was so good for India that after the British left, the Indians could not make a single beautiful building. As if building beautiful buildings is like a gauge as to how well the society is doing.
And I mean, on that argument,
just
some
weird
of
statements.
the finest Indian architecture was actually pre-colonial, pre-medieval. Also, it was in ancient India.
Exactly, which you guys destroyed. Which
no,
the
but
British
the
destroyed.
remains of a lot of early medieval Hindu architecture we still have in India.
Of course.
But I mean, we're drifting off.
But my whole proposition here is that Donald Trump's immediate clique is full of people who have made extremely controversial statements, and a lot of people who are political opportunists, like J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance was in the Democratic Party for the longest time, and suddenly he switches teams and just plays on the Trump rhetoric, and it really works for him. And in fact,
that's how power works.
yeah, and
everywhere.
it's kind of ironic because Tucker Carlson and Trump are really close friends, and Trump just goes on Twitter and says the most pro-Hindu things that Hindus have ever heard. And a lot of Hindus, specifically Hindus who are not staying inside the United States of America, most of the Hindus, I mean, they felt quite good about it. Like, irrespective of left or right, they felt that, hey, this is the first time someone's actually talking about Hindu issues. Like, they're talking about religions beyond the Abrahamic fold. So that
could this be a Vivek Ramaswamy, Tulsi Gabbard influence?
And J.D. Vance's wife.
J.D. Vance's wife,
Yeah, of
possibly.
course.
But I mean, I'll take it. We have a northern neighbor of the US which has been dominated by another South Asian religion, which is quite anti-Hindu. So having some representation in US government helps. I also think that I will backtrack on that, because I also think that this time Donald Trump has made a subtle effort to show that he's anti-illegal immigration, but he's also somewhat supportive of legal immigration.
Yes.
I mean, look at DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency. It's being headed by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, both of South African and Indian origin. So they are either legal immigrants themselves or from the families of legal immigrants. So I think Americans love a hardworking legal immigrant becoming successful in the US kind of story. I think the kind of immigration that the Americans want to push back on is the immigration from, these shady routes through maybe their southern border, or maybe through ocean routes where people are being smuggled into the United States. That's what I think a lot of the core political constituencies of Trump's are trying to push back on.
Fair enough.
Illegal immigration, building the wall. I think even in his previous campaign or his previous presidency, at some point he said something to the extent of, I'm going to build a huge wall on the US-Mexico border, but in that wall there'll be a huge gate where people can come and go legally, and he wants to monitor that.
Fair enough.
I don't really see the harm in enhancing the border security of your country. I'm not blatantly pro-Trump or anti-Trump, but it's a security principle.
I was listening to this.
I support it.
I was listening to this one podcast. I forgot. I think it was on Novara or something. And on that, a person brought this particular issue of immigration. And on immigration, he talked about how even amongst the Latino population, which is almost 18 to 19% in the United States, there is a big divide as to who are the original immigrants who came in and who are the newer ones. So there is a divide between the Venezuelans and the Mexicans. So the already settled Mexicans would not like new Venezuelans coming in and then competing for the jobs.
Yeah.
And that person whose podcast I was listening to, he gave a very interesting example of the parking lots being run by these communities and how in that parking lot a massive disruption came in because of the migration of the Venezuelans.
Yeah, dude. In fact, why look so far as Venezuela or other South American communities? There are a lot of hardworking Indians who are applying for tech jobs or applying for other IT services or financial services jobs in the United States. Some of them are still getting working visas. Many of them are returning. That's my assessment of what I'm seeing in the world. It's not rooted in empirical data, but I think if there was to be a consistent effort of a study on this, it will support my raw hypothesis that I don't think everybody who's going to the US to study is getting visas to stay and work. Many of them are coming back. Some are staying and working legally, and I think this class of people, Indians, many of them, we might know personally from school and all, Indians who have gone to the US to work legally, they also want to be differentiated from a lot of the northern Indians who are taking shady, donkey routes and going to the US through the Mexico border. In fact, there are a disturbing amount of Instagram reels of Indians just getting detained at the US-Mexico border and saying that I entered on this date, now I've been detained by the US Customs and Border Police. I'm sure the US Customs and Border Patrol is seeing all this, and that's why they are very naturally they are worried about their border security, as they should be, and this is not going to help the public image of Indians who are settled there, Indians who are running convenience stores, for example, Indians who are doing IT services kind of roles, who have reached that country on their hard work and legally. Now there is a two-pronged problem here also, because the fact that so much of our internal domestic population and our labor supply wants to sell their land and rush to the United States reflects of a very poor employment and regulatory environment in India. So people are selling their ancestral properties and leaving the country for better job opportunities. So even we have some introspection to do.
We saw that in the 90s. We saw that in the 90s. Two of our dad's sisters went to the United States and Canada respectively because there were no opportunities in Bihar.
No, but that's not comparable. They went they went after marriage, and they're like.
But still, why did they go? Because the West had better opportunities.
Yeah,
right?
but this is no. I'm saying that people are going through legally, like our aunts. They went legally. They went after marriage. I'm comparing this to. I'm saying that this should not become a trend where people are going through just to leave India illegally. That's happening particularly in Punjab and Haryana, where in fact even Shekhar Gupta spoke about this. And those kind of things are going to harm the public image of Indians who have been there legally. And I think it's a domestic policy issue in India also, because we need to start introspecting why so many youth from our country is taking these shady, donkey routes where they might lose their life along the way instead of staying home.
भाई इससे अच्छा है टूरिस्ट वीजा लो और अपना पासपोर्ट फाड़ दो.
ये काटेंगे यार. कुछ सीरियस बात करने यार, तू भैंस जो गांड मार रहा है.
नहीं चल
ये ब्लूपर्स में रखेंगे.
प्लीज लेट्स गो. आगे चल थोड़ा जोक भी तो करना चाहिए ना. चल आगे चल.
Anyway, so we need to start reabsorbing our domestic labor supply. We need to start creating wealth creation domestically. We need to start absorbing jobs within India, because this donkey route business is not doing good to the Indians and India, and it's not doing good to the public image of Indians who have gone abroad legally. So this is something that MEA, Ministry of Finance, they need to sort of sit together and think about a policy approach that can solve this issue.
Absolutely.
But वो हम करेंगे नहीं, हमें मजा नहीं आता.
चल रहा है यार. Anyway,
I can imagine some babus in some government of India ministry. This might be an uninformed view, but that is the view of the government, and that's the cost of inaction. Is that people will always view your smartness and your intellect as inefficiency, so that the government must bear. So the view is that I can imagine some bureaucrats at the MEA or finance ministry thinking, यार 200-400 यूथ इंडिया से बाहर जाके मर भी जाए तो मरने दो ना यार, कौन सा हमारी पॉपुलेशन वैसे भी कम नहीं हो रही है. सो दैट्स जस्ट हाउ वी लुक एट आवर पॉपुलेशन. इट्स अनफॉर्चुनेट, बट दिस इज द व्यू दैट इंडियन bureaucracy holds about the Indian public. Let's not be under any false impression that the government is your well-wisher, which is why I even sort of agree with this Vivek Ramaswamy, Elon Musk and American distrust of your government.
I mean, even Mohan Bhagwat had said something on those lines ki, the government will come and protect you, but before that you have to protect yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, again, rhetorics, but similar lines. Anyway, talking about protection and security, should we go to our next topic of the day?
Yeah.
So recently, this particular topic we've discussed many times, but we'll keep on discussing as promised in our second episode itself, Manipur. And the reason why we're talking about Manipur again is that recently there was a massive firefight which happened between militants probably belonging to the KLA, not KLA, but probably the Hamar Legion of the Kukizo militant branches, and the CRPF, in which 11 militants were killed and one CRPF Jawan attained Veer Gati. Now, coming back to my first proposition is that why did this violence take place? Turns out that a few days before, the militants decided to come from the hills to the valley to attack somewhere near Jiribam. There was a Hamar teacher, a very educated man, who was brutally shot and then burnt by Maiti militants. So in response to that, the Hamars, who belong to the Kukizo community, they came down in heavy numbers. This is my analysis, because the government of India hasn't revealed the ethnic identity of all the militants that were killed, but according to my research, this is the basic ethnic identity, because these militants came down and then they kidnapped around 6 Maitis who are still missing. 2 Maitis were burned to death, and overall 15-16 people died in this massive uptick in violence that happened in Jiribam. It's become so bad that in 6 police station areas of Manipur, AFSPA has returned. Congratulations. AFSPA is back in Manipur and the dark days have officially returned.
Imagine being so woke that you bring back AFSPA.
Yeah.
Ministry of Development of Northeastern Region, MHA.
Yeah.
Excellent job on that.
Yeah. AFSPA is back.
AFSPA is, in fact, there was such a continuous and sustained attempt to negotiate with many northeastern armed groups. Some of them were, bribed. Some of them were fought with.
They were given
many
businesses.
of them were killed.
Some of them were included in the BSF.
Yeah. And after all of that, we are returning to a place of where in Manipur, Maitis and Kukis just won't look eye to eye anymore. We have essentially what has become a border in the Imphal Valley versus the tribal areas. So the hill areas have been separated from the valleys, and the CRPF is basically patrolling the buffer zones. And it's incredibly unfortunate because we are living in times where the state apparatus makes a very bold claim of having been the first government that is so inclusive of the northeastern affairs. Yet, I think we need to do a better job of being proactive about the peace and the resolution processes there.
Absolutely.
Because, honest to God, I think in the last few weeks, in the last few months, every other Indian issue has gotten more coverage. We are speaking of gangsters giving threat to Bollywood actors again. We are speaking of Hindi heartland issues a lot more, which we should.
We're talking about Dhoni being retained in Chennai Super Kings.
Dude, we are talking about Abhishek Bachchan and Nimrata Kaur and
Nimrit.
Kaur. I keep confusing it with somebody else's name. But this is on top, and this is literally on top of when like Maithis and Cookies are killing each other, both Indian citizens, both citizens who technically have all the rights which are extended to all the rich sort of South Delhi people or the Bombay folks,
Or Gujarati businessmen.
yet we are choosing to erase them from public media outcries. That is, it's a choice after a point.
Of course. Like if you think about it, like the kind of wanton violence that was also happening in Bihar in the late 90s, it also did not get any type of media coverage because after a while, certain areas don't matter to the mainstream media and like the central government, and after a while they're just ignored and forgotten about, and it's just recorded in files.
Yeah.
And I think we can stop our discussion on Manipur. That was just like a brief discussion. And the third and the final topic that we'll discuss today is North Korean soldiers in
There's
Russia.
another after that. You
There's
speak
another
about,
after
yeah.
Okay. North Korean soldiers in Russia. There are apparently, to a lot of credible intelligence sources, there are almost 8,000 North Korean soldiers in Russia right now, and they are there to gain valuable combat experience so that they're prepared for an eventual assault that is going to happen on the 36th parallel. 36th or 38th parallel? Check.
I'll just check. Yeah.
So
I think it's the 38th.
I think it's the 38th parallel. This is the parallel. This is basically the line which divides North and South Korea, and it was agreed to be the ceasefire line after the Korean War ended. 38th or 36th?
38th parallel.
38th parallel. Yeah, I corrected myself. So
because it roughly follows the 38-degree north parallel.
Yes.
So it becomes the 38th
Yes.
parallel.
So imagine, you have 8,000 North Korean troops getting valuable combat experience in one of the most advanced warfares that we are seeing right now. Hamas is not advanced because Hamas is not as technologically superior. The reason why I'm calling the Russian-Ukraine war more advanced is because this is the conflict which I would say is the first major conflict in the 2020s to actually reimagine what conventional war can look like. And we discussed
Especially in Europe.
Especially in Europe.
Because Europe hadn't seen conventional war of this scale maybe since the Second World War.
No, since Yugoslavia.
I mean, yeah.
Since the fall of Yugoslavia.
Yeah, fair.
Anyway, so you have drones, you have suicide drones, and all types of different technology being used. And that could be a very good precursor to what wars will look like in the coming 10-15 years. I mean, I think a brief prequel to all of this was Nagorno-Karabakh, but again, I wouldn't compare that because the enemy in that, the parties in that were two polar opposites. You had Azerbaijan, which had suddenly become very, very rich because of the oil money and technologically superior, and they were getting 70% of their funding and weapons and their drone technology from the Israelis, mind you. The Israelis were providing Azerbaijanis a lot of drone technology. Then came the Turks. So before all these Turks and Azeris tell you that they care about Palestinians, they were using a lot of Israeli technology to kill Armenians. So yeah, I mean, in geopolitics, there is no religious.
I mean, look at it that way, right?
Exactly.
We are seeing a war between Iran and the Israeli state, yet only Palestinians are dying.
Exactly.
So you have Hezbollah versus IDF. You have the axis of resistance or axis of evil, however you may want to call it. Iran-backed proxies bombing Israel or fighting with Israel. Israel doing missile attacks, but it's almost. The number of missiles fired and the number of bombings done or the number of ground invasions done somehow mostly are leading to deaths of the Palestinians, with some number of people dying in like southern Lebanon also.
Absolutely.
But if it's the Iranian state and the Israelis at war, why are only Palestinians dying?
Absolutely.
And is it fair to be a proxy for another state for regional diplomatic or power related goals? Is it okay for such a large population, an entire ethnicity, to be a proxy?
Absolutely.
I think the more extreme Judeo-centric lobby within the Israeli government, I'm not saying they're all inhuman, but I think the incumbent cabinet definitely has started thinking that it can eliminate the entire state of Palestine.
Absolutely.
And I think all we can do.
They are absolutely gonna do that.
Yeah,
They have made it very
that's
clear
their
that
clear
that's their main
agenda.
goal, and they've also said that settlements in northern Gaza will return.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's so I mean we digress from the main topic, but again, even in the Nagorno-Karabakh war, we saw a lot of drone technology being used, and the fact that the Armenians could not implement anti-drone technology and also implement same types of technology in their arsenal because they were weaker, they were not as economically advanced as Azerbaijan. They basically lost all of Nagorno-Karabakh, lost Stepanakert, and by 2023, all of the Armenian population from the Artsakh region was pushed back into mainland Armenia. And again, they became proxies, like you said, proxies of the Russians. So 8,000 people, 8,000 now are North Koreans, 8,000 North Korean soldiers fighting on the front lines of Ukraine and Russia is a very, very disturbing sign of what might
I do think
be
that
coming.
what was worrying the Western world, and now because a lot of like the Democrat-led intelligentsia is obviously very critical of Vladimir Putin. We don't know his entire relationship with Donald Trump. People have assessed that they might have been friends at some point, but you know,
There's
foreign
already
policy,
tension.
yeah,
There's already
and
tension.
US foreign policy is, I think,
It's going to be the same.
it's less affected by changes in
Absolutely.
presidencies. American analysts also keep saying that, you know, politics ends where the coastline sort of starts. So the foreign policy it remains consistent. I think that will be my assessment. Having said that, though, we can't discount the fact that Trump will try to gain some domestic political points by saying that he's going to bring back American money from the focus on these wars, and he's going to stop funding maybe the Israeli efforts in Hamas against Hamas, and try to reduce the supply of weapons and the flow of like American naval ships to that region to sort of secure Israel and those sorts of things, just to score sort of domestic politics points
Absolutely.
in the US. And to add to that, I think the Democrat-led Western world, because I mean the US government is sort of the unsaid leader of NATO and all these alliances, sort of suffered a setback with such a high participation in the recently concluded BRICS summit. The Chinese went and the Indians went. So China plus India, that makes up for half the world anyway. So China and India is in a summit, that's like half the world. And then in addition to that, it was very well participated by the African Union. There was a lot of participation from Central Asian countries. So Vladimir Putin was able to sort of successfully give this message that I still have some support despite my actions in Ukraine, despite whatever flack the Wagner group may have gotten, despite whatever the Kremlin must have felt over the last few years. Vladimir Putin feels like he still enjoys support, which is hard to counter when like half the world is still attending the BRICS summit in your country.
Absolutely.
So those are my thoughts.
Same.
But I think if Trump and Putin are able to sort of bring the Russia-Ukraine settlement into the Russia-Ukraine war into a settlement, Kiev is going to be very unhappy because the war will stop, and that would mean status quo in the territories that they've lost. But I do think that this war has reached a point of fatigue for everybody now.
Absolutely.
So Trump would be better served trying peace efforts anyway. Sorry, you were saying.
Yeah, I'm done. I'm done with my points.
Right.
You wanted to add one more?
Yeah, I
point
mean, I think the last issue that's recently come up was there were protests, and I'll get your thoughts on this also. But recently in Allahabad or Prayagraj, whatever your leaning is, I saw a lot of protests by aspirants of the UPPCS, the State Public Service Commission led exam. They were recruiting review officers and assistant review officers and even PCS officers, and I think the exam was being held over 2 days. And that led to some protests because the students had this anxiety that there may be unfairness in the conduction of the exams. So there have been a lot of protests, tear gas firing, lathi charges with the UP police sort of charging at these students. And my assessment is that what will take for a lot of these state public service commissions or even the UPSC to make a more efficient grievance redressal format. You know, I don't think that quote unquote bright students of the country that we always advertise as a demographic strength of our country are treated very well in India. You know, I mean, it takes very little for the state apparatus to become violent against students. You see that in protests almost repetitively. This is almost a very lighter scale reminder of the NEET crisis, which was much more national. It saw a lot more media attention. But I think public examination scandals in India and public examination issues which lead to student protests are too frequent for a democracy that claims to be earning its demographic dividend. We need to start seeing that why is it that our regulatory framework allows for overcrowded libraries to function which can flood and 3 UPSC aspirants can die? Why is the police finding it easier to lathi charge students? I don't blame the police, by the way. They're in some ways doing their job. But why is the police being told to lathi charge students instead of any grievance by the State Public Service Commission that can have a grievance redressal platform or something like that? Why doesn't the NTA have a grievance redressal platform instead of, you know, having to sort of deny all the allegations that are put on you, and then these issues go to the court? So I think it's a very poorly planned higher education setup. Public examinations are just a manifestation of poor enforcement, and you know, the Ministry of Education is really going to have to really speed up.
It is just.
Let's get your thoughts on this.
It's just like they've set a pattern, and it's like their comfort zone, and they just don't want to come out of it. They're like कि भाई उस बंदे से क्लियर नहीं हो रहा है तो ये मेहनत नहीं कर रहे, वो बंदे का लाइक यू नो ये एप्टीट्यूड नहीं है, तो बेसिकली जो पैटर्न सेट है वो पैटर्न इफ लाइक अ सर्टेन पीपल कैन मास्टर, इट्स वेरी इजी एंड ऑफ कोर्स इट टेक्स अ लॉट ऑफ हार्ड वर्क, इट्स वेरी इजी टू क्लियर दीज एग्जाम्स. So, but again, I don't feel that such posts should be so exam centric. It should be a lot more like, you know, experience based, and that's where I feel lateral entry comes to play.
Yeah, I mean, I think the US government, we were analyzing their appointments anyway. So the US government is very focused on contractual bureaucracy. I think in India, when a new government comes in, the Prime Minister swears in and like a few dozen cabinet ministers and few ministers of state, and then, you know, they come and reappoint their secretaries, joint secretaries when they are in government. But when the presidency changes, there are about like 4,000-5,000 posts which are, you know, almost refilled when the new president comes in.
In the
so
US.
yeah, so the presidency and the presidency related system almost gives a more stronger voice to like contractual bureaucracy. I think we are beginning to see shades of that in the Indian setup also. Every once in a while, see, this government has had a priority of breaking the domination of the IAS, but even first breaking the domination of civil servants, but even within the civil services, they are trying to break the domination of the IAS first. So a record number of joint secretaries now are from the Indian Railway Traffic Service, for example, or they are from the Indian Audits Account Service. Sometimes you'll see a joint secretary Home Affairs from Indian Forest Service. So all of that is beginning to happen now. So this is definitely a trend pointing towards maybe more of a contractual expertise focused bureaucracy. You have some private sector involvement also at director JS levels. I don't know how successful that is. But coming back to this PCS issue, I do think that India would be better served with like some kind of grievance redressal mechanism for students instead of just jumping at them with lathis and tear gas, which we find a lot easier to do. It's lazy, it's less respectful of the youth that you claim will carry your demographic dividend forward, and I controversially think that we are missing out on it.
उसमें से जिसको opportunity मिल जाएगी बाहर जाने की, वो तो पक्का बाहर जाएगा.
Exactly.
फिर आप लोग complain करोगे कि brain drain हो रहा है, brain drain.
फिर वो डंकी रूट ले लेगा.
सही है, I think.
Yeah, I think we can call it.
We can call it. Thank you so much. Like and subscribe, share करो, सबको दिखाओ, खुश रहो.
Thank you.
Bye. शब्बा खैर.